Learn something new every day. All right, it's 5 after. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for joining today for the April CONDG meeting. Make sure to follow all these great social media links, websites, meetups, all that good stuff. So you'll know when the next meeting is, get reminders, stay in touch with us, all that good stuff. I want to address this before we keep going here. What happened last month? So what happened last month was right when I started the meetup, which is 6 p.m. my local time, my home internet went down at exactly the same time. So what we had to do was we kind of called an audible, which is an American expression, I guess. And Kevin Griffin took over and did the presentation on his own stream. That's one Kev Griff. I'll post it here in the chat. One Kev Griff. And he took over and did the presentation. And it looks like most of you made it over there, and it went okay. But then something else went wrong after the presentation, because I was hoping to get his video and post it to our YouTube channel. And what happened, we're not really sure what happened, but most of the audio from his presentation was stripped out, I guess by Twitch. So what you just ended up with was a long period of silence, and then my audio, for some reason, wasn't cut out. And so it was like me just chiming in and saying things every once in a while. But none of his audio made it through. We're not sure why, because the broadcast was fine. The audio went through the broadcast, but the recorded video did not. So we don't have that one on YouTube. I apologize for that, but I highly recommend checking out Kevin Griffin. You can follow him on Twitter, one Kev Griff, or here on Twitch, one Kev Griff. Give him a follow, and I'm sure some of his Dapper materials out there already. You can find it on his GitHub and things like that. So definitely check it out. Speaking of YouTube, we do have a YouTube channel. We don't have a actual YouTube URL yet. It was a bummer, David Freiling. And thanks for joining us. But if you go to this ridiculously long link, I've also created a bit.ly for it, and that's a capital Y in that bit.ly URL there, so bit.ly/CONDG YouTube. You can check out every video except for Kevin Griffin's right there. We need 100 subscribers to get to a real URL, so please go there and subscribe, and then we can get a much nicer looking URL. You can check out videos from the past meetups, including, if everything goes right, today's. Jason Bock has already agreed that we could put this video on our YouTube channel, so go ahead and subscribe and check that out. I'll get that one online, again, assuming it works well, a couple days after today. Yeah, no repost of Kevin. Sorry about that. We couldn't make it work. We couldn't get anything from Twitch. We just couldn't make it happen. So it would have been just a silent video for the most part. So sorry about that. That is a bummer. It was a good presentation. We do have some raffle prizes to give away today. We'll have one license for any JetBrains product, which is pretty cool. And I have some special Couchbase swag, which is this fantastic backpack cooler Couchbase logo on it. Also, put some Couchbase swag in there, whatever I've got around, stickers and buttons and pins and everything. I'll throw it all in there, and I'll mail it to you as long as you're in the United States. So sorry, Croatia, I can't send you this prize. Anybody in the United States eligible to win that prize. The JetBrains prize, as far as I know, there's no requirement about where you have to live. It's just going to be emailed to you. So, all right. So that's just enter a message into the chat, and you'll be entered automatically. So you who are already chatting, you're already entered. Some other meetups we want to promote in the area. So CO Azure, Central Ohio Azure Group, they meet every month, and they're meeting online. So you can go check them out at meetup or coazure.org. I believe they use Microsoft Teams to meet, but I haven't been to one of those meetings. So go check out the details there at coazure.org or meetup/Central Ohio Azure, especially if you're interested in cloud-based Azure stuff. Our Microsoft says spinning. What does that mean, spinning? Is that a bad thing? Is the video buffering for you, perhaps? Is it happening for anybody else? Just please let me know. Next up, the Columbus App Dev User Group is also meeting every month. They meet on Teams/Twitch, I believe. Streaming is fine. All right. I don't know what spinning means then, or Microsoft. You might want to let me know. But go check them out at columbusappdevusergroup.com, or again, meetup.com/columbusappdevusergroup. They do all kinds of great stuff. Historically, they focused more on mobile, desktop, Metro-style apps, but they do all kinds of topics these days. So definitely go check it out. The C-Bus Pass group is now known as C-Bus Data. Some of you may be familiar with the Pass organization folding, and the Columbus meetup is not going away, just changing the name to C-Bus Data. They don't have a new logo yet, so it's still C-Bus Pass in the logo, but their meetup is now called C-Bus Data. So go check them out, meetup.com/cbuspass. We have a group in Columbus called Let's Talk IT Columbus, which is about topics that are important to a developer, but they're not about technology themselves necessarily. It's about things like project management and communications and stuff that even BAs and QA and managers can even get into. So check that out. You might want to email Seth Petrie up here, Aaron Petrie up here at Improving, and check out the meetup.com link there. Let's Talk IT Columbus. They are still meeting online, so check them out. Here's our upcoming calendar. So we've got Jason Bock on what's new in C# 9. And next month, we don't have a speaker for sure yet, so we're still working on that. So another reason you subscribe to social media and CONDG.org, so you can be aware of that. We've got a speaker who is still tentative. I'm going to be checking in on that, hopefully today or tomorrow, to see if he's still planning on speaking in June. But that'll be on serverless and Azure Functions. We've also got Chris Woodruff lined up, another, I believe, Quicken Loans, someone who works at Quicken Loans. He'll be talking about Entity Framework. That's all the way in October. So I look forward to that. And we've still got some other slots. So if you have topics you want to see covered or specific speakers, or you want to cover a topic, please contact us. I'll give you my contact info here in a second. Here's some of the topics that we've brainstormed about that might be interesting. So we've got the Azure Functions and serverless stuff probably covered. I'm working on some Xamarin topics, but if you have anything that covers, say, Selenium or Kubernetes or Docker, those are topics we're looking for specifically. If you have other topics you'd think might be useful to a .NET group, they don't have to be .NET specifically. They can be .NET adjacent. So, for instance, Docker, Selenium, Kubernetes, those are all .NET adjacent. Those are interesting topics as well. So let us know if you have any ideas for speakers. And we can draw from the world these days. So it doesn't have to be necessarily someone in Columbus or Central Ohio who can speak on that topic. If you're looking for work, if you're looking to find a job, or if you are hiring, feel free to use the chat here to promote whatever positions you're hiring for, whatever positions you're looking for. If you don't want to blast that to the world, because this will be recorded on YouTube and broadcast on Twitch, you can email me, me at mgroves.com. You can email me for anything that we've talked about today, and I can help you make that connection, put you in touch with those recruiters or people looking to hire. If you want to be more discreet, like you don't want your current employer to know, for instance, you can email me. I won't charge a fee or anything like that. I'm not trying to get any sort of bounties. I'm just trying to make the connection because we can't meet in person right now. So that is a service I'll provide for no charge. If you are wanting to help out, to be part of the team, if you're looking, maybe you have an idea about how to make it so that my home internet doesn't bring down the meetup for the month, contact us. If you want to host a meetup, for instance, you want to host it on Twitch, and you have the ability to do that, let us know. We're looking for help. If you're interested in anything else, any other ideas you've got to marketing this group to people or helping us reach more people, please let us know. We're looking for help. We just have an email thread that goes around. We collaborate on these things, so feel free to reach out to us. That same email address there. And if you're new on Twitch, just want to point out that if you're using on a desktop, for instance, you'll see this little chat box here in the bottom right. You need a Twitch account. This is where you can put your questions tonight for tonight's speaker, who will be, by the way, monitoring the Twitch chat and answering questions as they come in. I'll still be keeping a record just in case, but he'll be monitoring those chats and answering questions when he gets a chance to. So throw those in there. Ask questions. Ask away. You need a Twitch account to do that. Hopefully you've had enough time to create that account. Okay, so without further ado, I want to introduce our speaker. I'm going to put him over here on the screen and turn on his audio. Jason, how are you?
I am doing well. Can you hear me?
All right, let me make sure the volume is up a little bit here. All right, try again. And let me know in the chat if that audio sounds okay.
Okay, test. Am I good? Or yes, no?
While those chat messages come in, Jason, you might want to go ahead and start sharing your screen
Okay.
if you want to. Okay, everyone's saying the sound is fine. It's good. It's much better. Maybe a bit stronger. I've got it all the way to the max, from what I can tell. So that's probably
Seems
the
to be
best I
going
can do.
through okay on my end. It's popping up as green. So,
Okay.
but
Maybe just turn up the
is it a,
volume on your own speakers then. PG Colada. Okay. All right.
okay?
So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jason. I'm going to take myself off the screen and please take it away.
All right. So I'm looking over here. And if you see me looking this way, it's because that's where I had the other screen for the Twitch stream and the chat. So I'm going to be looking over there occasionally just to make sure I see messages, and you can see my lovely, serene twilight picture of a dock. But we're going to change that and actually get the slide showing here. And there we go. All right. So thank you all for attending tonight. My name again is Jason Bock. I'm a developer advocate at Rocket Mortgage. And the talk tonight is on what's new in C# 9. So here's a little bit of information about myself. As Matthew said during the talk, if you have any questions relating to the things I'm talking about, put them in the Twitch chat. I will be looking, occasionally over here and seeing if anybody's posted anything. And Matthew, if there's something that I missed for whatever reason, just get my attention. Say, hey, Jason, shut up for a sec. Here's a good one, and I will definitely take those questions and answer them as best as I can. If something comes up later, feel free to send me an email at that address that you see, and I will answer it as best as I can offline. Okay. So for tonight, the demo code that I'm going to be showing is at that first repository. Excuse me. The second one is also some demo code I'm going to be showing that has to do with source generators, and that's a little bit more complicated. So I have a separate one there. The slide deck itself is at that third URL. So if you go to that repository, you'll see presentations of ones I've done in the past, including this one. If you want to download it, I highly recommend it because in the notes sections on slides, I have links to what you're seeing as screenshots, for example, on some of those slides. So you can take a look at that stuff. And also the last slide, I have references to a whole bunch of other things that you can dive deeper if you want to. So those are the places to go take a look at. They're relevant to what I'm going to be showing tonight. Okay. And yes, I see Matthew's already grabbed them. So that is awesome. All right. So I'm going to spend some time on the evolution of C# and how we've gotten from version 1 to where we are today. The majority of the talk is going to be on those C# 9 features and showing some code and how things work in C# 9, and then spend a little bit of time with where C# may possibly be headed in the future. So, language evolution. It's kind of, I shouldn't say kind of, it's really interesting to me that C# is a language that's been around for quite some time. In fact, the first release of C# was in 2002. And there was some time before that where it was going through some beta cycles and people getting some early bits and seeing what this new language was all about. It's interesting because, that's 19, if I did the math right, 19 years ago. It's older than my kids. And, people these days, if they're getting into C#, don't remember or know about all of the kind of the reasons on why .NET and C# was even started in the first place. Excuse me. So I'm going to go through really quickly. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but just real quick to go through the versions and talk about just what features showed up in C# over the years. So with the first version of C# obviously had to do a lot with object-oriented programming. And C# was in a way a direct competitor to Java. So there are a lot of similarities between C# and Java out of the gate, though C# had these things called delegates and events that actually got Microsoft into trouble with Visual J++, if you can remember that way back in the day. So that's what you see in the first version of C#. with C Sharp 2, out of all these features, the one that really I think is probably one of the most important features to be added to C Sharp is generics. It's weird to think that for about 3 years, C Sharp had no concept of like a list of string type or any of these other generic types. It was painful to code without them. And that's probably, if there was a feature that you said you absolutely cannot take away from me, it would be generics in C Sharp. With version 3, that was basically LINQ. But with LINQ came all these other features along with it to make LINQ a thing in C Sharp. For example, being able to do var, being able to do anonymous types, do expression trees, and so on. And these are features that you can use independent of LINQ. You don't have to be writing a from select and all that other stuff. You can be using var and extension methods outside of LINQ. With 4, we finally got dynamic binding, which I know every C# developer was begging for, and that's a little bit of sarcasm. In fact, it's a lot of sarcasm because I don't think dynamic was a huge issue for people. This was actually around where dynamic languages, Ruby, Python, and so on, were becoming really hot languages. And it was kind of this response in a way to have C# add that in. To be frank, I barely use dynamic in C#. So, and some other features, but you're seeing a little bit of reduction, and that continues with 5. Yes, await, async, asynchronous methods was a big feature in and of itself, but there really wasn't that much else in version 5. And there's kind of a, there's probably a lot of reasons why, especially if you talk to people from Microsoft, why this is, but one of them was really from day one with the first version of C#. They always had this intention of the compiler being written in C#, but it took many years to get to that point. That's what Project Rosalind was all about, was creating a public API for the compiler that was written in C# itself. So you may have heard of things way back when there was this thing called PDC, and Anders Heilsberg would talk about compiler as a service and give a little bit of a hint as what's going on. And I'd follow this obsessively because this sounded so interesting and cool to me. And Rosalind eventually became this public thing and people could actually start using it and playing with it. But what was really unexpected is in 2014, they announced that this would also be open source. It was originally pushed to Codeplex, but then eventually it moved to GitHub itself. And so that was a real big mind shift in the Microsoft world of doing everything in open source. And if you look at where Microsoft is, especially in the .NET space, everything is open source these days. And it wasn't always the case. So it's a great thing to be able to see, for example, all the contributions that people make to C# and .NET. Now, the people that you see here are people that work at Microsoft, and that's no surprise. For a lot of people, this is their day-to-day job, is fixing bugs, adding little features, maybe even bigger language features, but that's what they do. So you'll see those people at the top of the list, but if you keep scrolling down, you will see people that don't work directly at Microsoft doing these contributions. And that's a very encouraging thing because people in the community can contribute and are actually encouraged to contribute. So if you are interested in doing that, again, if you look at the notes section on the slide, you'll see the link on where you can go, and you'll be able to, if you use especially that label community, there are things that are marked as issues by the folks at Microsoft to say, this is an issue that probably somebody in the community could pick up with relative ease and do the work and submit a PR on it. And so if you're interested, I would highly recommend checking this out and seeing if there's something in here that you may go, I might want to tackle this and actually be able to say I contributed to C# and .NET. But what's interesting is from 5 to 6 and now from 6 on is that all of this is based on this open source compiler. And so you see an increase in features, though, a number game is not what we want to play here. But what's interesting is that all this work was done out in the open and in public. And in fact, there were a couple of features that got pulled, like I think a couple weeks, give or take, before they did a final release. And I thought that was actually a good thing to do because they were able to make these changes and work with the community and potentially find things that they couldn't resolve in time and just say, you know what, it's just safer to not do this right now. And that's continued on through the version since version 6. Okay. And in version 7, not only did you get that kind of here's the big version N release with all of its new features, but that's also where they played with this idea of point releases. So we had a version 7.1 and a 7.2 and a 7.3. And the ones in these point releases were fairly small, but they played with this idea to kind of say, hey, we know we can potentially produce a couple of things that the community wants that aren't that big. And so we don't have to do this big bang release every year or 2 or 3 or, whatever the cadence was. So although now this cadence is shifted somewhat to where things are today, and I'll explain that in a moment. But that was interesting because they explicitly tried this idea of point releases. With version 8, the thing that I found interesting with version 8 is, yes, there's these things like default interface methods or members actually is the correct term, which threw some people into fits because how dare you make interfaces have implementations? Nullable reference type is also a very big issue. But the thing that I want to bring up here with version 8 is this is where C# now moved to the cadence of what was .NET Core and is now .NET 5, though version 8 was targeting, as you're going to see in the next slide, a version of .NET Standard. And this is important because you see this wall of text. Focus on the thing that I put in bold here, which is C# 8 is only supported on platforms that implement .NET Standard 2.1. In other words, this doesn't work with .NET Framework 4.8, or at least it's not supported. People have found ways to get some of these features to work, but for things like default interface members, it will not work, nor will it ever work. Okay, because that required a change to the runtime that did not happen in .NET Framework 4.8. And 4.8 is essentially sunsetted, done, dead, however you want to view it. So if you want to keep in line with the new features in C#, if you really want to keep blazing those latest versions, then you're going to have to make sure that you're on either what was .NET Core 3 for C# 8 or for C# 9 on .NET 5. Okay, that is the wave of the future from that point on. And so what we're going to talk about tonight are these features. Some of these I'm going to go into more detail than others. Some I'm just going to gloss over a little bit and just show you some code and how it works, because some of these are meant to be very niche, very targeted, targeted features to solve a very specific problem that people in the community have encountered, but a lot of people probably will never use that feature. Yeah. And to be clear, it's not that the C# team just adds any feature willy-nilly. They've spent a lot of time discussing issues, making sure that there is, a arguable benefit for putting that feature in. It's not to be taken lightly. And even features that are considered to be small or niche, if they still have worth and there's benefit for doing it, they will do it. But I may spend very little time on those tonight and spend more on others, but that's the set that we're going to be going through tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to bring up Visual Studio in just a second. Just going to check over here. Why should I choose C# over Java or Visual Basic? That's a question that we could spend literally hours or minutes or seconds on. There's no right way to answer that. That has a lot to do with what do you currently use, the place that you're at, what are you using, and what do people have familiarity with? There's no way to say why pick one over the other, so that becomes very contextual. Okay. So, all right. So when I'm going to bring up Visual Studio, I'm actually going to be showing you a feature just by showing the code. When I've done this talk for C# 6, 7, and 8, I build a console app and then I just have functions that show each of the features, keep it very basic for demo. And I'm doing the same thing here, but when you see the code at first glance, it's probably going to look a little weird, especially if you've done C# for quite some time. Okay. So here it is. So this is a console app. Okay. And I keep stressing that because when I say it's a console app, you may be looking at this and going, where in the world is the program class and where in the world is the main method? Okay. And that's a feature in and of itself. This is called top level statements. You can actually see this in the code that I have here, where I say, note that this is showing top level statements. And then as I go through the code, notice that each method will also have a link to the feature itself. So you can get more information later on if you want to. Okay. But this top level statements feature is essentially saying, if you are writing an executable, and you have a file that doesn't have any class or main method program, and you just start calling a method or you start defining methods in that class file, the C# compiler will say, oh, that's where you have your top level statements. And essentially what it does is it synthesizes a program class and a main method, an entry method for you. Okay. So in fact, if I say here var x is equal to args that, you'll notice that that actually works because there's this implicit args parameter given to you from the main method if you define it that way. And so by default, it has that args array for you so you can process anything that's passed into your executable. Okay. Now you don't have to do this. To be clear, this is an opt-in feature. You can still write your program class. You can still write your main method. That's perfectly fine. But I found this to be like a lot of modern C# features where it doesn't seem like it's a big deal, but yet the more I use it, the more I really, really like it. It's bringing in succinctness and terseness. In fact, as people have said, though this isn't going to be correct, you can actually now do like system.console.writeLine and say hello. Okay. And that is a legitimate one-line C# program to do hello world. And this is something that the designers of C# have said that they really want to start getting away from a lot of syntax noise. It's interesting. One of the folks on the C# team, Jared, he has said that he teaches a class for people on C# like in schools. And it's interesting when you try to do the hello world, how people say, why do I need curly braces? Why do I need a main method? What is program? What is a using statement? What, and it's not like for me and for people that have been in C# for quite some time, you just know these things. But for somebody that's new to it, that's arguably a lot of noise that really doesn't need to be there. Okay. Now, I have using statements here, and that's something that you can't get away with right now, though there's talk already about a future version of C# where you'll have global usings. So you can kind of shove those into one file and then have like a global using, but that's a potential future feature. So that's what top level statements are. You can only have one file that does this. And if you try to do this in more than one file, the compiler will bark at you. Okay. But I now write all of my executables. Like if I'm writing a web app, I just basically change it so it doesn't have that program and main method there. Okay. So something to keep in mind. Okay. Again, I'm just going to be checking over here. Is C# script competing with Python and PowerShell? So if I understand that question correctly, C# actually does, like there's a, in Visual Basic, for example, there is a C# immediate or interactive window. And you can actually use C# as a scripting language. And there's also from the command line, you can type CSI and start just writing C# code as if you were in a scripting language. So you can do that. I haven't seen a lot of movement or people diving into C# to use as a scripting language. Though what I do find interesting is that there's a lot of work being done now with C# notebooks and having C# be a first-class citizen in Jupyter notebooks. And there's a lot of cool, interesting work being done there. I'm following that with great interest, because I think that might be an interesting way to do a lot of like tutorials and documentation as a Jupyter notebook. Yeah. All right. So let's dive into the first feature here, records. Okay. And this is probably one of the features in C# 9 that's gotten the most press. It's talked about a lot. And what is a record? Okay. Well, let's just go through this code here first. And actually, I will run it while I'm talking about it. And then we'll kind of look at the console window that comes up to see the results and how they got there. Okay. So come on, you can do a computer. You can show me that console window. Oh, whatever. We'll come. Well, now you do it. See, if you complain enough, then it finally comes up. Okay. So we have this customer. As you can see, var customers equal new customer. We're passing in some value, probably an age and a name. And we print it out here. And then we also print out their age property and their name property. Okay, so let's stop there for a moment and see that, that's what we're getting here. So how is customer defined? Well, if you would think about how you do this in C#, you'd create a class, you'd have a property, or you could do this as a struct too, that's fine. But you'd have properties, you'd have a constructor, you'd override toString, blah, 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 blah. Okay. A lot of boilerplate code that for the most part can be generalized. Okay. And arguably that is what a record is. So if I do an F12 on customer here, that's one way to define a record. There are other things that you can add to records. We're not going to cover all the options, but this to me is the most succinct way that you can create a record. Okay. So you'll see here that I'm actually defining a constructor, but I'm also defining properties that are going to be generated for this record. That's where the age and name properties come into play. But I also pass them in on the constructor as well. Okay. And you'll also see that there's this keyword record. So that signals the compiler to say, oh, what you want to do is actually create a class, because in C# 9, records are classes underneath the scenes. But it's a class that has value equality semantics. Okay, so essentially when you create a record, it's also going to look at the properties and say, well, I'm assuming what you want to do is you want to implement equality, and implement equality in such a way that's going to basically look at the property values and see if they're equal. So it generates all this stuff for you that you don't need to do. Okay. For example, the toString that was generated for us. Okay. And if I want to deconstruct the values, we'll get back to this. This won't work in a moment. But if you want to deconstruct the values, it actually creates an automatic deconstruct for you. You can create a new version of a customer with a different name using this with. This is what's called a wither. And this was added not just for records, but for other things in C#, where you can say, I've already got this thing. Well, it's for records, but you can say I have this original definition and I just want to change it so that the name with the new one is Joe, because by default records are immutable. Okay. So I can now have this customer with a different name. And if you see down here, that's where the customer with a different name comes in, where the age is the same, but the name is different. Okay. So let's stop there and go back to the record here. And when I said that they're immutable, well, what does that actually look like? So let's see if I should have brought this up first, but I'm going to bring up my trusty ILSpy tool. And if you don't know what ILSpy is, it's a decompiler that's been around for a long time, and it's really, really awesome and cool. So you can see that ILSpy is really, really smart. It knows with the C# 9 syntax what this looks like. Okay, let's see if we can change it to C# 8. And now it suddenly changes to being a class, because in C# 8 there was no record. And so you can see IEquatable is implemented. We have our age and our name properties. And it's funny because C# 8 doesn't know what an init is. We'll talk about that in a moment. It puts that in there. It has an override of toString. It does equal and not equal, get hash code, on and on and on. Okay, and it actually also puts your deconstruct method there too. So that's where you can do deconstruction with a record. So records are, you can also think of them as basically your POCOs, your plain old CLR objects or DTOs or whatever you want to call them. And they're kind of like those things on steroids. They have a lot of the things that you would probably be defining yourself, except it's done for you. And you don't have to accept them. If you want to define a record that has its own implementation of toString, the compiler will let you do that. You can override toString and do it the way you want to. You can do equality and do it the way you want to. Okay. But the point of records is kind of you're letting the compiler do these things with semantics that you probably want in the first place. Okay. Now I mentioned withers, and that when I do the C#8 syntax, it had no idea what that is. Okay. I'm going to actually jump to C#9, but I'm going to do it in IL, which is the intermediate language in .NET. And I apologize because if you don't know what IL is, it can look kind of ugly to say the least. Okay. But what's interesting is if I look at this property age here, you'll see that I have a get, whoops, sorry. Spy thought I wanted to jump somewhere. You'll notice that it has a get and a set. But the set has this weird mod rec is external and then blah, blah, blah. What that's really saying is I wanted to define a property this way. That's what that ends up looking like. There's this new keyword init. These are init only properties. Okay. And an init only property allows you to assign a property either on the constructor or in an object initializer. Okay. So in this case, you'll see that I created the customer this way. Okay. What I could also do is you see down here, I have second customer. I could have defined second customer to be new customer and then like that and say age is equal to 22 and name is equal to Jane. Okay. And close that off. And you don't like that. Oh, it's because that's right. Because I have this constructor syntax. And so it's forcing me to actually call that constructor because I have a constructor that's taking arguments. So in this case, I can't do that. But if I defined a record like the mutable customer here, okay, so that's what I have right here. You'll see that I can assign this age property within the constructor, or not within the object initializer. The name is a getter and setter. Okay, so later on here, if I wanted to say mutable customer .name is equal to X, that's perfectly fine and I don't get an error. But if I want to change age to 44, you'll see that now I get a squiggle because I'm outside the object initializer and I can no longer set that. That's why up here, the age isn't settable because it's only in init. Okay. Now, one other thing with records, again, I said they have value like equality semantics. So down here where I created this second customer that has the exact same age and name that our customer has up here, when I do equality on them, and if I go back to the console one, you'll see that that was actually evaluated to being true. That's again, because if I look at the implementation of this customer and I dive into the equals method, you'll see how it has this equality contract in here, but it's basically doing a comparison with the age and the name as well. Okay, and so that's why those two different objects ended up being the exact same values. Okay, just checking over the comments here. All right. So that's essentially records. And these init properties, you don't have to only use within records. You can define them in your own types as well if you so choose. I like this because it again enforces this notion of immutability, which has a lot of advantages in your designs to have types that are immutable by default, unless you have to make them mutable like I did here. Records, one other thing, records can inherit from other records. As you see, I'm doing with identified customer, I'm adding in a GUID identifier and a value customer that has a decimal of money. Okay, but records, you can't derive classes from records. That doesn't work. Okay, so once you define a record, then you want to have any inheritance after that. Those also have to be records as well. Okay. All right. So that is records. Let's move on. And again, some of these I'm actually going to run, and some of these I'm just going to show the code and give give you an explanation as to what's going on. Target type new. This is one that is, when I first saw, I got a little bit of the willies, but then I found that I think there's a couple of places that I think you can use this, and it lends to some nice succinct code without losing the meaning of what's going on. And what do I mean by that? As you can probably tell, I love var. I like using that rather than putting the type on the left. And the reason why is because unless you're calling a method or something like that, you can see the type that it is on the right, and I don't mean to get into an argument of whether var is right or not. That's about, as useless as tabs versus spaces, because we all know tabs is correct. And if you like spaces, you're wrong. And now I probably lost half the people on the conversation as they're quitting. But it's more about being also consistent in a code base. Everybody do it the same way, and you can enforce that in editor configs. But the thing I'm showing here is if you really like target type new, or if you really like putting the type on the left-hand side, you can now use target type new where you don't have to use that type again. You'll notice here that the customer, I'm just saying new, but there is no new customer. Okay. C#9 is now smart enough and allows you to say, okay, if you don't give the type name, then I'm just going to assume you're trying to call a constructor on that type. I can't do this with var. If I said var here, it's going to bark because it's going to be like, I have no idea what type you're actually referring to. So in this case, it doesn't work. I have to put customer on the left. Okay. But if you do this and it finds a constructor that matches what you're passing in, then you're good to go. Okay. Now, where do I think this is good? Where would I want to use this? Not in my code here. Again, I like var, but if I dive into this implementation of a wrap dictionary, this is one place I can see it being very useful, because with field definitions, you have to put the type on the left-hand side and the right-hand side if you initialize it. But I don't have to do that anymore. I can say the type on the left and then just have on the right saying, I want to new up one of these. And to me, this still reads well because I see what the type is. I know, I have an idea as to what I'm newing up, and I don't have to necessarily put in the type name again. So this is actually one spot I'm using new a lot. It can potentially be a little bit overused, to say the least. I just put on Twitter a couple days ago because I ran into this with some code I was writing, where I could literally do this. I could say var service is equal to new. Well, it actually wasn't var service. It was, I think it was this. Sorry, this. Well, this won't show up, but it was some service property. I can't remember what it was that was well defined. So I could say new, and then I was passing something in that was also known by the constructor, and that needed something that was also known. And so that's what I could have written. Should I have? I should have put a poll up here and see if people think this is a good idea or not. I saw this and I put it on Twitter, and I personally kind of ran away screaming because this felt to me like it was pushing a feature too far. It would still work. It was still doing the right thing, but I don't really know if I like that. So I'm still kind of playing with this feature to go, where in my code style do I think this is a good thing to do or not? Okay. But just, be aware that this is there. And again, with fields, I definitely feel that that is a little bit of a win, that you can get a little away with typing just a little bit less in your code. Okay. All right. Module initializers. This one is again, a little bit of a corner case, but it is kind of interesting. Okay. Which is, I'm going to go into this code here where the values are. And ignore the attribute property or the attribute there on the method. We'll just ignore that doesn't exist just yet. We'll uncomment it in a moment. Okay. But let's say I had some static class with a static property, and yes, I'd be screaming myself going, don't do this as statics, blah, blah, blah. This isn't something you want to do. But maybe you want to optimize some things so that you do have some global state and that it's set once and everything's good. The problem with something like this is that you want to make sure that this is actually initialized before anybody else could potentially call it. And there are ways that you can possibly mitigate this, but there is a way within the CLR to say, I want this code to run before anything else does, before even your main method does. Okay. And that's with something called a module initializer. Now, if I run this code without this there, and I try to use the values this way, what's going to happen? Okay. Well, what should happen is when this builds, and I think I confused it because I had it running before. Sorry. Yeah, I know that. Okay, let's try that again. There we go. And now we get what I expected, which is an invalid operation exception because values was not initialized. And so when I try to call sum on it, it's just not going to work. Okay. But now if I go back to initialize data and put module initializer in there and run it, well, you'll note what's interesting here is that that console outright line initialize is called is written first. Now, if I go back into my program here, then this is written out to the console window. Okay. And remember, this is just being called essentially within a main method. Okay. So this was all called. I was able to initialize that property and everything works. So this is what module initializer does for you. It allows you to specify a method that will be run before anything else is. So there are some limitations to this. You can only have one module initializer method in your code, because if you add more than one, the compiler doesn't know which one to run before the other or anything like that. So there's one and only one, which means you probably don't want to be defining these in libraries because then you're going to start getting into conflicts. It has to be a void method. It can't take any arguments. It can't be generic, and it has to be accessible. But if you do have those things, then you can use a module initializer and ensure that you will be doing some setup well before the actual code in your application is going to run. Okay, so that is a module initializer. Close that down, and let's come back to my code. Can I put a module initializer on an async method? Ooh, I don't know if you can or not. But you know what's interesting about code is that I can come into here and say static async task. Okay. And let's just give this a whirl and see if this works. And it doesn't seem, well, now I don't have an await. So let's just say await task dot delay 500. So I'm not going to run this. Okay. I just want to get an await in there. And now it's saying, yeah, it has to return void. That was the other one I was forgetting. So thank you for calling me out on that one. So you can't do tasks. The reason I was blocking for a second is because you can have, as you may have saw in version 7.1 of the list I was going through at the beginning, there is a way for you to write async main methods, which is nice because when you start doing async and await, it almost becomes infectious. It like keeps rolling and rolling up and up and up your code till you get to the top. Well, if you wrote a main method, that you couldn't make that async. And so a lot of people would just do like hold their nose and do a get a waiter on it. You don't have to do that anymore. You can actually have an async main method and C# does the right thing for you. Unfortunately, initialize doesn't work that way. So it has to be synchronous. So yeah, that kind of stinks. But again, this happens before the main method itself is called. So this is something that's kind of like a CLR thing in that it's just saying, I don't know really how to handle an awaitable task. So you got to make this a void method. Yeah. All right. Moving on. This is, again, one of these small feature things. I'm going to run this just for you to see it, but this is one of those that starts getting into these areas of probably very few people are going to use this or care about it. But if you do, you care about it a lot. Okay. So this is skip locals init. Whenever you write a method in C#, all of your variables within the method are essentially zeroed out. They're initialized to 0. Okay. And this is done for many reasons. One of them just to be safe and secure that you don't have garbage data in a value that you end up accidentally using. Okay. For the vast majority of your code, you don't notice this and you don't care that this is happening. But if you're doing memory manipulation, if you're doing stack allocation natively, if you're doing those types of things, You are paying a potentially slight performance penalty with .NET doing this zero variable initialization. Okay. So now what you can do is use this skip locals init attribute, which I believe you can actually also set all the way on your assembly. But I'm just going to do it on this method, which notice it's marked as unsafe, okay, because I'm going to be doing weird things with pointers and addresses. Okay. This is something that you would never write. At least I would never write this. I can't even think of the last time in C# I wrote any unsafe code that did any pointer manipulation. You might have. I'm just, in my experience, I've never done this. Okay. So when I wrote this example, I had to think for a second, how does this actually work? But the way that this is going to work, and let's make sure that I've got this commented out so it's going to work the way I think it should, is when I run it, you'll see that that GUID value is, come on, 0. And while I'm here, let's turn that module initializer off so we don't keep running that. Okay. So that's what a GUID is initialized to, and that shouldn't be unexpected. Okay. But now let's put this skip locals init in there. And what are we going to see this time? Well, we're going to see garbage. Okay. Because the runtime or the compiler essentially says, I don't care what data you grabbed. It's going to be whatever I see here. And I'm assuming that the user is going to do the right thing and not use this garbage data unless they'll eventually initialize G to whatever value they need. Okay. So this is, again, one of those things of, if you do a lot of memory manipulation, if you do stack allocation directly, like stack alloc or things like that, then this attribute may be something you want to take a look at. There's an article that I have in my slides in the last slide notes section where somebody's already gone through this and done benchmarking with code, and essentially has shown if you have what's typical C# code, you don't need this. Don't put this in your code and just hope for the best that you might get an improvement, because in all likelihood you won't. But if you are doing those things that I mentioned before, then yes, you might start seeing some small but appreciable performance improvements. Okay, so that's what skip local inits does. This I'm not going to run. I'm just going to show is that now in C# we have native data types. So there's an nint, which is a native integer, and then there's an nuint, a native unsigned integer. And those values are represented by whatever processor you're running on. So these are native data types to the processor architecture that your code is executing on. If I ran this, you'd see that value is actually represented by an int pointer. So just a tiny bit of history here. This has essentially been workable to a little bit of a degree with int pointer and uint pointer in C#, but it was very, very limited. And essentially what C#9 lets you do is now do like native operations, addition, and all these other things on these data types. Again, then they'll be sized depending upon what process you're on. I can't think of a case where I would need this, but there are people that, again, do want this in C#, and so now they have the ability to use native data types. Another one that got added is a half. This is a floating point type that is essentially half of a single, if I remembered my bits correctly. Okay. There is no way to define a half via some kind of keyword, or if I put, like, you can put .d, .l, or not .d, I'm sorry, you can put like D and L and after some values, and that will tell the compiler what you really want that typed to. There is nothing like that in C#. But what you can do is say, well, I want this to be an actual half type. Okay. So if I ran this, you would notice that, you know, a half is really small because it's shrunk down from even a single. But in certain cases where you want a floating point number, but you don't want all of the overhead of even a single, you can now use a half type. So again, one of these corner cases that few people will need, but it's there. Okay. Checking over here. We are getting closer to C. You're not wrong. that's not an untrue statement. That there are things that have been added in C#, especially in the last 5 years, that are making it arguably easier for people to do native things. And there's some other things I'm going to be talking about later on that also fit into that category. So to make C Sharp even friendlier and friendlier, but still be safe with doing some low level or native operations. Okay. Covariant return types. Covariance and contravariance has been in the CLR since .NET 2.0 when they added generics. And, arrays have their variance fun. The co and contravariance wasn't added to C Sharp until C Sharp 4. But there's been other cases with covariance and contravariance. And if you're like, what is this? Look it up. It's a very long conversation about types and what can be returned and what can be accepted and what's covariant and what's contravariant. The long story short is that this, to me, makes types make more sense, for lack of a better definition. Okay, and I'll explain that when I show you the code here. With C# 9, covariant return types is now a thing, and this is helpful in some cases where you're doing things like a fluent interface. Okay, so you'll see here that I have this custom pipeline. We'll see what that is in a moment. And I'm calling methods like add identifier and add a name to it. And then I call get configuration on it and I print some stuff out. Pretty boring. But what's interesting about the way this is defined is its base type. Okay, so you'll notice here that I have a base type pipeline that has a virtual method add identifier. And it's trying to do this trick of returning this so you get this fluent API interface, okay, which in some cases is really, really nice. But the problem is that if I ever wanted to have some type of inheritance hierarchy from this and let people define their own custom pipelines, well, now it sucks because I can't change the type here. At least I wasn't able to do this before. It had to be a pipeline, even though I wanted to return a custom pipeline, because I have my own little extra things or, what have you in my return value. Okay. And then you'd have to remember to cast and it was ugly code, bad times. But now in C# 9, you'll notice that what I can actually do on the override is say I'm going to return a type that is a subtype or a subclass of pipeline. And that's okay. And that works. So when I go back to my code here, you'll notice that from add identifier, if I hover over that, you'll see that that's actually a custom pipeline type now. And that's fine. And that just works. So somewhat of a small addition, but in those cases where I'm overriding methods, I can now actually return a type that is a subtype of what was in the original method. And that is fine. Before C# would bark at you. It doesn't do that anymore. Okay. All right. Static anonymous methods. I'm not going to run this other than just showing that if you do have a anonymous method, like what I'm doing here, passing into any, I can capture state. I have a local variable here called value, and I can manipulate that within that anonymous method. And maybe you don't want to do that because that can lead to weird, hard to understand behavior at runtime. Okay. What you may want to do instead is make it so that you can't access any local values. Okay. So that's what I can put now as a static keyword on that anonymous function. Okay. And so you see, I can't do this. If I uncomment this code and try to do this, well, static keyword works, but you'll notice I have red squigglies now all over the place on value because it doesn't let you capture your outer state, so to speak. Okay. So it's just a nice little addition you can put now on your anonymous methods to say, I want to make sure that I can't accidentally close over variables. And I'll just use the static keyword to do that. Okay. Same thing with local functions, the C#. They originally were just a local function. And then I can't remember what version they added it in, but they allowed you to put static in front of that local function definition. And then it couldn't accidentally capture local state from the outer function. And that's essentially the same thing in what's happening here. Okay. Local function attributes, just, since we're talking about local functions, before C# 9, you couldn't attribute them. Now you can. So if I wanted to make this function obsolete, I would just uncomment this and that would work just fine. So if you want to put attributes on local methods in C#, you can now do that. And like, as you know, some of these I'm just blasting through and just showing you what you can do. With discards and lambdas, discards were a thing that were added, I believe, in C#6. A lot of people would use an underscore as kind of a trick in a way in C# to say when I'm calling like a lambda for link, I would just pass in an underscore. That was technically a correct variable name, but that was kind of a hint to show people reading the code that I really don't care about that variable. In fact, if I come up here, you can see I was kind of doing that here. But this eventually started getting to the point where C# honors the underscores being a discarded value. In other words, I don't care about this value, and it's okay if I'm saying this is truly a throwaway discarded value. You can now do this in lambdas as well. So this is something that's allowable now in C#. Getting back to native things, function pointers. This is this was something you could do in C#. Well, you could do in the CLR, but you couldn't do in C#. And for those really small corner cases, you'd kind of want to do this. Okay. So you'll notice here that I have an unsafe keyword and I'm calling some method invoke. That's passing in the same function here, but in the second case, I'm add the little ampersand address of operator. So what's actually going on with an invoke? Well, the first one is pretty forward in the sense of what the argument is for invoke. Okay. It's an action of an int. It's a delegate. We've used delegates for many, many years in C#. Nothing new here. I can call a of 42 and I know I'm going to call whatever function was passed into me and passing in a 42 and everything's good. But check out this syntax. That is a function pointer. And it's a pointer to a function that takes an integer and returns void, which is exactly what we have here with pointing to functions. Okay. I go over there, that's what you can see here. All right. Except we're using this delegate pointer syntax, but we invoke it the same way. There's no difference. Okay. The reason why you may want to use a function pointer is because, again, it's that slight performance increase over what you would normally do with a delegate or an action or a func. In the vast majority of cases, you don't need to do this. And in some cases, when you're doing p invokes or native invocations, this is also helpful as well. But if I think of all the code I've written in my life, I don't think I'd ever need this. But for people that are especially library authors that may need to do really low-level access things, this may be something that they do want to put in their code. You won't see it as a consumer of it, but they're getting these little improvements. They're getting rid of some little paper cuts here and there, and that may make your code just that much faster in certain cases. All right, better conditional expressions. So if you've ever used a ternary operator, and I admit that I'm kind of a fan of ternary operators, before C#9, if you wanted to return types that were different between the true part or the true part or the false part, you couldn't do that. They had to actually be the same type, where you had to do some casting in there and it looked kind of ugly. Okay. No longer. I can't use var. I still have to say what my base type is. But if you remember when I was showing the records before, these two types derived from customer. Okay. So I can say the winner is going to be one or the other of these customers, but this just works. Okay, so C#9 now has this, a little bit of an improvement here, so that your ternary operators, you can actually have different types for the true and false parts, so long as they share a common base type. And that's what you would declare over here on the left side. Okay. Partial method signatures. The reason I bring this up is if I go over here to calculate, is partial classes and partial types in C#, they've been around since 1.0. And for the most part, I never use them myself. Code generators would, if you're building a WinForms application or other applications, they may declare partial types because they're going to fill them in based on what you do in, for example, Visual Studio. Right. But I would never define a partial type myself in my code. It never really came up. But with the advent of source generators, which I will show in a little bit, partial types suddenly become to me, a really, really big thing, because now I can have a partial type defined and let a source generator put in all the rest of the stuff if I want to. So what they did in C# is make partial members get a little bit more expressive. You can see these in the comments, is that a partial member can now declare accessibility. You can return values from them. You can actually pass in arguments. So before, partials were really limited as to the members that you could add. And that's no longer the case. You can actually be very expressive now with partial types in C#. Okay. All right. So if I go back to my program here, go away. Thank you. All right. Pattern matching with the switch statement has gone through a lot of improvements in C# 7. And if you've used switch recently, you may have noticed that you can write some really terse yet expressive code in C#. And that's just continued from 7 on and will continue in the future and get more pattern matching behaviors that you may have seen in other languages. The thing I'm going to show here are a couple of extra things that they've added now in C# 9. So there's this game that my wife and I play a lot, this board game called Quirkle. And Quirkle allows you to, create different rows based on colors and stuff like that. And you get a score based on what you put down. And so I wanted to have this little method that says, well, how do I qualify a score? And say, if I have a score of this, what does that mean? Okay. So let me run this and make sure again that that's the one that we're actually going to be running. And go down here. Okay. So let me run this and let that do its thing once it says it's ready to go. And then we'll take a look at the code and come back to what we actually see in the console app. Okay. Come on, let me go back to my Visual Studio, please. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, sometimes you talk to your computer when it's been a long day. So we're going to show different values and how they were qualified. Let's actually look at how that qualification happened. So you notice here I'm switching on the score, but I have these greater thans and less thans, and I'm also using a literal keyword and. Okay. So now I can essentially set up different Boolean conditions in my switch statement. I can say if the score was greater than or equal to 0 and it was less than 4, then it's a minimal score. If it was greater than or equal to 4 and it was less than 8, then do decent, and so on and so on. Okay. Now you may wonder why it uses and instead of just doing this. And this was actually asked by to the C# team. Why can't we do this? The reason why is there are certain conditions, especially with Boolean expressions, that you may want to do here, that if you allowed the ampersand to show up, it became way too ambiguous in certain cases. And they just couldn't figure out from the compiler a decent way to say, how do we know what the user is actually trying to do here? And so what made it very, very unambiguous is to say and. Okay. You can do and or that also works as well. Okay. So I really like these things. I really like the pattern matching capabilities now in C#, and doing something like this just to me reads extremely well. Okay. And you also notice here we have the discard, which is if nothing got matched, well, this is an impossible score as far as we're concerned. Okay. And as you can see here from the console app, that's where we're getting all of these qualifications. Okay. Now, one other thing that came from the improvements with partial match or partial matching in C# 9 is also a not match. Okay. For many, many years, I'm sure if you ever wanted to compare to something not being null, you would do this, and that was perfectly fine. But what's interesting is you can override the equals and not equals operators on a type. Most people would never overload them or implement them in such a way that a null comparison wouldn't work the way you would expect it to. But that was technically possible. Okay. So in C#, 8, you could actually do what's called kind of like a property pattern. And what this ends up being is an evaluation to say, well, is this actually null? Okay. But this doesn't read that well. In fact, if some people saw this at first glance, they'd be like, what is that actually doing? In C# 9, it has now made it totally unambiguous. You can now say, you've been able to say is null before, but now you can say is not null. And that will literally compare it to null. Okay. So small thing, but I have been changing all my code now. So instead of doing this, I now do this because there is there's no ambiguity here. I always know I'm going to be comparing to null. Okay. All right. Last one here before we get into source generators, and then we will be done. Get enumerator is a nice little addition in that, again, if I look at my value customer implementation, I don't have a get enumerator on it, but yet I can pass that in here and actually do an enumeration on this value, or on this object, I should say. In fact, I'm going to run this so you can see what that is actually printing out. Okay. So we get this enumerator extension. And once this runs, we shall see, I think, 2 values coming out of this. 3. I was wrong. There's 3 values. Okay. Where are those 3 values coming from? They're coming from an extension method I wrote. So I wrote get enumerator for value customer, and then I just bring back the properties that are in that object. And this just works. So you can now write a get enumerator extension method for a type and use that within a for each. And for each is smart enough to say, well, you don't have that on the type itself, but do you have an extension method in scope that will let me do this? Yes, you do. And I will call that and make that work. Yeah. All right. And C# people have many years ago when VB invented is not. I wish that C# would have done this many years ago myself. I started as a VB developer way back in 1995. And there are some things that I don't regret at all from Visual Basic. There were a couple things though, and one of them was is not. I wish this would have been added in a long time ago, but we now have it. So. All right, source generators. So I could do a whole talk on source generators. In fact, I might have proposed to Matthew when he was asking for what kind of topics could you do. I think I might have actually said, well, I can do a talk on source generators because source generators are so cool. I'm kind of saving to be the best for last in this presentation. Source generators is this feature that it's not technically a C# 9 feature per se, in that there's no new keywords, there's no new syntax, there's nothing that's being added to C# 9 itself that's source generator specific. It's actually a compiler feature. So from that perspective, this doesn't work with previous versions of the C# compiler. You do have to be targeting C# 9. Okay. But what source generators allow you to do is literally what it's saying. It allows you to generate new source code on the fly. Okay. You can't change code. So Matthew and I were talking about before, and he was mentioning that I wrote a book or co-authored a book on metaprogramming, and he mentioned his book, and I had forgotten. I never put 2 and 2 together. I'm like, oh, you're the guy that wrote the AOP book. So people that have wanted to do metaprogramming, aspect-oriented programming, all sorts of code weaving, modification techniques, never really been able to do that in C#. There are tools like PostSharp or Fodi or other things that let you do this, but not within C#. This is not that. This doesn't allow you to change code that is currently there, but that doesn't minimize the feature. By adding new code, there is a whole ton of things that people are doing in C# 9 now. And one of them is, again, check out the notes section of my last slide. There is a bunch of stuff that Microsoft has also produced on this feature to show people what you can do. One of them was implementing iNotify property change, because that to them was the canonical example of source generators. We have to be able to show an example where you don't have to, as a developer, implement iNotify property change yourself. And the way they did it is you create a field, You put an attribute on it called auto notify, and it creates a partial type that implements iNotify property change for you, creates a property for you, does all the magic for you underneath the scenes. So you take basically all this boilerplate code like this and shrink it down to that. Okay. So that's what source generators can do. They can also make things potentially more performant, especially if you've been doing a lot with reflection, because reflection happens at runtime. And there's ways to mitigate the performance hit that you might get from reflection, but you still have it. Okay. Whereas if you can generate that code path such that that becomes part of your compilation, so much the better. So I'm not going to go through all the details on how to write a source generator here. Like I said, I can easily do a whole talk on this, but I just want to give you a feel for what is possible with a source generator. And this is something that I call inline mapping. This is not meant to replace AutoMapper, but it's kind of that same idea. I have a source object, I have a destination object. I want to create a destination based on the values from the source. Okay. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually doing this via a source generator. So I have my map generator here. And again, I'm just going to give you the very quick run through of this so you get a feel for what this is. A source generator has the generator attribute on it and an iSource generator interface. And there are two methods that you need to implement for my source generator. One is initialize, which you can just make a no op. You don't have to, you have to implement it, but have it do nothing. Or what I typically use it for is a way to find things within source code that I'm interested. Keep in mind that a source generator is running and looking at code that is currently being written. And it's doing this via the compiler API's definition of a syntax tree. So all the things that are in your code is a big syntax tree, type declarations, method declarations, event declarations, and a whole bunch of other things. And what I can do with this initialize method is say, you know what, I only want to focus on a couple of things. In my case, what I'm doing is there are a couple ways to define these mappings. But if I go into this example here to show you how this works, this is one way to do it, which is I have, and ignore the code lens errors. That's actually a Visual Studio bug that they introduced if you're doing source generators. So I can honestly say that's not my fault. That's Visual Studio's bug, and they are fixing it. But with this map2 attribute, what I'm saying here is look at the type it's defined on, which in this case is source, and then look at the type I want to map to and find the matches between those two. Okay. And so in my source generator, what I'm looking for are classes that are actually attributed with map2. There's also map from and map, but that's not important. We're just going to focus on map2 right now. And so if I look at my receiver, if you squint hard enough, what you can see here is for all of the nodes that are visited in a syntax tree, I'm looking, for example, when you define a type, a class or a struct. And what I'm looking for on that type is, do you have on those attributes a attribute that is equal to, for example, my map2 attribute? And if you do, then I want to look at its constructor arguments and find out what is the type that you're trying to map to. And then I package that up as a target. Okay. So then in my map generator, when it's told to execute, that's the other method you have to call, I can then now look to see what the map receiver has found and go through all of the map receiver stuff and say, okay, what extension methods do I want to create for the source such that I can map the source to the destination? And again, this gets a little complicated, but if I dig in through my code here and I start looking at what I'm doing, I just want you to see right here that I'm building source text that if you squint hard enough, you can start seeing, oh, I'm generating a code file that has a using system and potentially the destinations namespace. And I'm generating a partial class that has these extension map2 methods. So I can map to the destination type. And these maps here are actually the properties that map between the source and the destination. Okay. So when all is said and done and I have my source generator fire, which you can see here, I now have a map to destination extension method. And if I F12 into that, that is the code that is generated by my source generator. I know exactly the ID and the name and when, and I can map from the source to the destination itself. And nothing could be faster. Okay. And in fact, let me go back in here and I'm going to pull this so that it's docked here. And then I'm just going to come to the source. I'm going to put in, let's just say public string X, because I'm not being creative with names. You'll notice that nothing changes on the generated code. But if I put that in our destination, X shows up with the map. So this basically gets updated in quote unquote real time. Okay. And then it goes away if there's no longer a map there. And I can also debug into this. This is one of the nice things that, you know, with other tools that I mentioned before, it may or may not be easy to do, but this just literally comes out of the box with source generators. Let's just make sure that I am in debug mode to do this. And I have the right project as my startup. If I run this, and assuming it all compiles, and I get to that map to destination extension method call, what I should be able to do is, you did not do what I wanted you to do. Why not? I said clean, build again. It should have, whoops, no, I did, don't cancel. That was stupid. It is in debug mode. Let's build it again. Oh, you know what I did? I just realized what I did. I did Control F5, not F5. I'm a moron. F5 is what we want to do to launch into the debugger. Hopefully now I hit the right keystroke and we will actually break on things. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to hit F11 here and I step right into the source code. Okay, so me as an author of a source generator, this is so beneficial because I can step into these things. If I'm experiencing some kind of bug, if I'm adding a new feature to my source generator, I can do this. Somebody who's just curious, they can say, oh, that's what the source generator code is doing. And they can, you know, hover over variables and values and everything else. And it works just as you would expect. Okay. So source generators is an extremely powerful feature in the C#9, and there are going to be improvements added on to this in the future. So I would highly recommend taking a look at this. You know, maybe you don't use it in your day-to-day job, but it's that extra tool you can have in your tool belt to do some very powerful things. One other example that I've seen real quick, I'll mention, somebody by the name of Andrew Locke published an article on this where he took a Blazor application and essentially created a source generator to find all of the routable components within your application. And I thought that was just, check out the article. It is really, really interesting with what he did and what that enables him to do. You can basically set up a Swagger page in a way in your application to show all the routes that you can possibly go to just via the source generator that's going to create all this for you at compile time. Okay. All right. So I think that's pretty much it from what I can see on the chat. So let's wrap things up here. Move all these things out of the way. That, we can close that, and I will go back to my slides. There we go. Okay, so we did the demo, talked about all the C#9 features that are here. Some I spent more time on than others, but that's what you have now in C#9. And I'll reiterate again, if I had to pick a couple in here that I really, really like, it's records are cool. Source generators are just awesome. I'm having so much fun with source generators. But where are we going to go in the future? Okay. Well, the roadmap and the path is pretty clear. There's still, you know, if you think about years down the line, where are we going to go from there? That we just don't know. But it's a much different world with C# being in open source. You can see the evolution and the change of the language, you know, and in pretty much near real time, if you want to think of it that way. The group publishes all their language design meeting notes and things that they're talking about. And you'll see a couple of things. I'll mention it in a little bit in terms of other features they're looking at. But the path is pretty clear. It's not where it was before when it was all closed source. So that's a really good thing in my opinion. So there's a link, again, check out the notes section on this slide, but there's a link where you can see what they're thinking about for the next version. And the cadence, I mentioned this before, the cadence is now that C# releases with every version of .NET, not framework, but .NET. So .NET 6, which is scheduled to come out in November, will have C# 10. Will it have all of these features? Probably not. This is a working list and it will change. I'm almost that I will guarantee is that this will change. How it will, I don't know. But some of these things I think I would expect to see come in C# 10 if I had to bet, which I think, well, the source generator version 2, there's some things that they're adding there that will be nice. Allowing you to define records as being structs rather than as classes will probably be there. File scope namespaces, I think will be there, but some of these things may not. So keep abreast of what will be coming because some of these things might be very interesting. The static abstract members and interfaces can lay the groundworks for some really cool things in the future. Okay, but this is a working list. Maybe some of these things will catch your eye. Generic attributes is one that I've hoped they would add 3 versions ago. And it's something that the CLR supports. You just can't define them. You can use them in C#, but you can't define generic attributes in C#. So hopefully this will finally end up being in there. There's another site that kind of shows some of the things that they qualify and define as milestones, what things they may do, may never do. So you can take a look at that. Here's another list of the things that are in the working set. That type classes, concepts, structural, generic constraints, to me is where they would actually make the type system in C# much more expressive. If you've seen languages like TypeScript, for example, it has structural typing rather than nominal typing, which is what C# has. And in my opinion, I think that leads to a much more powerful, much more flexible type system than what C# has. And so I'm hoping that at some point they might eventually have something like that within C#. But there's other things that they've been thinking about as well. There are features that have been requested by many people because they think, I want to see this in C#. Quadruple precision floats. Somebody wants that, so they propose that. You can do that too. You can propose a feature, and that's perfectly fine. Keep in mind, though, and this is something I'm just going to state, is I sometimes see people say, I think C# should have this because of X, Y, and Z, and therefore millions of people should have this in C#. The barrier to adding a feature in C# is high, very, very high. What you are absolutely convinced of would be an awesome feature may not be for the community at large. Okay, so don't be discouraged if you think of something that you want there and it's initially shot down, or there's a lot of, what about this and what about this discussions around that idea. Okay, they just want to make sure that a feature that is added is something that will stand the test of time, because C# doesn't change backward compatibility. They're still very adamant on removing C# features once they're there. Okay, but if you do have an idea, by all means submit it. They want those contributions from the community as well. If you are if you have the desire to actually build a language feature, that is possible. But please don't just create a PR from their code base and expect it to be accepted. That's not going to happen. That will actually be rejected flat out. Follow the link in the notes section here about how you develop a language feature, because it is a very time-consuming endeavor, but it can be done. The feature expression bodied members being done for more than just methods was actually something that a community member did. Okay, can be done. So don't be disheartened, but it is a fairly complicated thing to do. Okay, so maybe you want to add a new feature. Maybe you want to do one of those contributions that I mentioned before. Whatever lights your fire, whatever is something that inspires you to say at the end of the day, I actually did this little thing here. That's a very empowering and enabling thing. Yeah. So while we may not be able to actually do the work, we being the community at large on features, we have the ability to bring that inspiration to the team in many different ways. And I'd highly encourage you to do that if you haven't done that before. All right. So that is it for me. What about nullability of references? Nullable reference types was added in C#. So yeah, that's something that's already there. Proposed underlines and long integer constants. Yeah, that underlines, those are added in C#7, I believe. And I think I had that in actually one of my code examples down here. Yeah, so this isn't a C#9 thing, but that is something that allows you just to make a constant or a value maybe arguably a little bit easier to read by having these underscores in there. They do nothing other than just, adding some space and making it a little bit easier to read. Yeah. All right. Well, I'll keep watching the chat over here, Matthew. But so if, as we're wrapping up, if people have other questions, I'll keep looking. But in terms of what I had planned, I am done.
All right. Well, Jason, thank you very much for the presentation. Let's all just throw some emotes there into the chat as a round of applause for Jason. And I'll give you actually an audible round of applause here. Thank you very much. I learned a lot of things, and I've been working on C# for a long time. So excellent. Thank you very much. And now you're huge. Yeah, okay. Anyway, so if you got questions, throw them there in the chat. We're going to, as soon as we wrap up questions, we're going to draw some prize winners and wrap up the April CONDG. So we're seeing some great jobs, some applause, great job, some yays. All right, that's good to see. I'm happy about that, everybody. You answered all the questions that came through in the chat that I saw, so I think there's nothing that you missed there. So excellent job on that as well. So if you want to get into the drawing, throw a message in the chat there. This is going to be your last chance to do that. Get in on this drawing if you want some prizes. We've got some excellent stuff up for grabs. Let me just change this window here. And we're just going to sort of move this one like this, so I can bring on this little program right here. So we've got two prizes to give away. One is a JetBrains license for anything that JetBrains makes. One of the things that JetBrains makes that I particularly like, besides ReSharper and Writer, is this tool here called DataGrip. And there's nothing really .NET about this per se, but if you're working with databases, it's a great choice. But you can choose anything you want. You can choose RubyMine, you can choose WebStorm, PHPStorm, IntelliJ, whatever license you want from JetBrains. I recommend it. So the other prize we're giving away, as I mentioned early on, is this fantastic Couchbase cooler backpack. It's got insulation on the inside so you can put your lunch or your drinks in there, take it to the park or whatever, a picnic. Enjoy some hot or cold food as you carry it with you. And I will stuff a bunch of other Couchbase swag in there. Whatever I've got around here, some stickers, some pins, some pens, whatever else I can find, I'll throw it in there. And I will mail that to you anywhere in the United States. So if you are not in the United States, you're not eligible for that one. But first place is the JetBrains. So we will draw for that first. And would a walker head fit in it? Like from the Walking Dead? Is that what you're asking? I have no idea, man. That's a weird question. Maybe. Or if something else mean by walker? No? Okay, I don't know. All right. So this is just to show off JetBrains and Couchbase together in one little quick demo here. So I can actually click this button, and you'll see that the messages you've thrown into the chat recently will appear on the screen. You can see like all these thank yous and would a walker head fit in it. They're all there, and so those are just the latest 10. But I'm going to copy over a query from my Scratchpad over here. It's a little more complicated query because it's a distinct, but I will pull a winner at random from everyone who's chatted in today's meetup, and I'm excluding myself and I'm excluding other organizers. I'll throw Alan Barber in here as well because I saw him chatting. What is his name? It's Alan is Alan P. Barber. I will exclude him as well from winning. So there you go. And I can leave you in there if you're interested, Jason, but I think you're also in there as well. Jason, Bock, RT. Exclude me too. PG Claudia, you don't want to win the JetBrains prize? I will leave you in for now, but if you win, you can choose to waive. All right. So here we go. This is going to pick the random winner. Drum roll, please. This is for the JetBrains prize. You won one a few months ago. Okay. Well, then I'll exclude you then. Why not? PG Colada. I got to go back and change this query next month. But okay. Here we go. And the winner is EK Mac. EK Mac, are you still around? I forgot to say that you have to be present to win this prize. This is the JetBrains. EK Mac, it looks like you're just chatting recently. Are you still around? Or did you bounce right after saying applauses? EK Mac. EK Mac. EK Mac. Hello? Are you still there? Oh, he's there. Okay. All right. Excellent. EK Mac, if you would please whisper your email address to me or email it to me, that's fine. I will get you this JetBrains prize. There's my email address, and I will get you a JetBrains license. Okay. It looks like you're still trying to get my attention, but yes, you're here. Make sure to whisper the email address to me or email your email address to me, or just email me, and I'll have your email address, and I'll get you that prize. It's a PDF for JetBrains license. Okay, and now we will exclude EK, if I can spell it, EK Mac from winning as well. And this is for the Couchbase swag cooler backpack with a bunch of other Couchbase stuff that I can find and cram in it and mail to you. You must be in the United States for this one. Sorry about that. But drum roll, please. And the winner is Bobcat1238. Bobcat1238. Are you here and in the United States? Hello, Bobcat1238. Are you still present and are you living in the United States of America? Yes, you are in the United States of America and you win. Okay. I need you to whisper or email to me your where you want this to be sent. Whatever address. It can be P.O. Box, home address, your office, whatever. Reynoldsburg. Perfect. Just send me an address and I will get this sent out to you as soon as possible. All kinds of great Couchbase swag. So thank you very much, everybody. And thank you again, Jason. I'll blow you up here on the screen some more. Report back on that walker head. Yeah, you might want to, I don't know how you determine that, but put your own head. No, don't put your own head in there. You can just sort of measure the inside, see if a walker head will fit. All right, so thank you very much, Jason. I appreciate it. Any more questions? We could do a raid if you want to do a raid. I haven't done a raid in a while. Switch/team/live coders. This is the right address? And since Jason is our guest, we can let him pick who to raid if you're interested. So here are some possible candidates. Whoops. We've got Patchy Codes, Tim Baudet. We've got Callow Creation. I think Kevin Griffin might have rated him last time. Mr. Demon Wolf. Looks like he's just getting started, but he's doing some gaming. We've got a vote in the chat for Tim Baudet, who's doing some telemetry stuff, it looks like. If that is a good choice. Any thoughts, Jason? You're muted, by the way, so you're welcome to talk on the stream or whatever you like to do. We got 2 votes for Tim Baudet, or Baudet.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm listening.
Oh, I see.
Like delayed on the Twitch. I'm over here, so.
Oh, I forgot to unmute my Zoom channel, so sorry about that. Now you're going to hear me twice. Okay, looks like Tim Baudet is going to be it. Any more questions?
No, I won't. Now I can hear you in real time. Okay. So yeah, just do Tim. That's
okay.
fine.
All right. So let's get that raid started. Everyone, just be nice to Tim and just give him some love as we go over there. Any more questions before we wrap up, Jason? Anybody for Jason? Any last thoughts, Jason?
Oh, just The last one I would say is just keep staying up with C sharp. If you're in the language, it's moving really rapidly these days, and that is not going to be stopping in the foreseeable future. So
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And make sure to follow on Meetup and Twitter so you know what's going on next month. Until then, we'll see you in May. Thanks, everybody, and have a good one.